In the heart of Rome, where ancient cobblestones whisper tales of emperors and artisans, there stands a testament to a different kind of empire, one built not on conquest, but on leather, craftsmanship, and an unmistakable double G logo that would become synonymous with luxury itself. The Gucci family's Roman estate is more than just a mansion. It is a monument to ambition, creativity, and the devastating price of success. Within its elegant walls, a story unfolded that would captivate the world, a narrative woven with threads of genius and tragedy, love and betrayal, opulence and violence. This is not simply the story of a house. It is the story of a family whose name became a global phenomenon, whose internal conflicts would tear apart one of fashion's most legendary dynasties and whose personal tragedies would ultimately overshadow even their remarkable achievements. The Roman estate, with its Renaissance architecture and meticulously manicured gardens, bore silent witness to the rise and catastrophic fall of the Gucci empire, a fall orchestrated not by market forces or economic downturns, but by the very family members who should have been its greatest protectors. To understand the tragedy of the Gucci mansion, we must first understand the extraordinary journey that brought the family to such heights, and the fatal flaws that would bring them crashing down. The Gucci story begins not in the marble halls of Roman aristocracy, but in the humbler circumstances of Florence in 1881, with the birth of Guccio Gucci. Young Guccio grew up in an Italy undergoing profound transformation, a nation recently unified and struggling to find its identity in the modern world. His father was a craftsman, and from an early age, Guccio was surrounded by the culture of Italian artisanship, the belief that objects should be made with care, precision, and an eye for beauty that transcended mere function. As a young man, Guccio made a decision that would change his life and, ultimately, the course of fashion history. He left Florence for London, where he took a position at the prestigious Savoy Hotel. It was here, observing the wealthy guests with their luxurious luggage and refined accessories, that Guccio had his revelation. He noticed how the aristocracy and the newly wealthy industrialists carried themselves, how their belongings spoke of status and taste, how quality leather goods were markers of sophistication and class. When Guccio returned to Florence in 1921, he carried with him not just memories of London's elite, but a vision. He opened a small shop selling leather goods, initially importing them before beginning to craft his own. His timing was impeccable. Post-World War I Italy was experiencing economic growth, and a new class of wealthy Italians was emerging, eager to display their success through material possessions. Guccio understood that luxury was not just about quality, it was about storytelling, about creating an aura of exclusivity and heritage. The early Gucci products reflected this philosophy. Saddle-stitched leather bags, equestrian-inspired designs, and impeccable craftsmanship became the hallmarks of the brand. The famous double G logo, interlocking in perpetual embrace, was introduced by Guccio's sons and would become one of the most recognized symbols in the world. The green-red-green stripe, inspired by saddle girths, became another signature element. Every piece told a story of Italian craftsmanship meeting cosmopolitan sophistication. By the 1950s, Gucci had expanded beyond Florence, opening boutiques in Milan, Rome, and eventually New York. The brand had become synonymous with la dolce vita, the sweet life that characterized post-war Italy's cultural renaissance. Hollywood stars and international royalty became customers. Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, and Jacqueline Kennedy were photographed carrying Gucci bags. The Gucci loafer became iconic. The bamboo-handled bag created during wartime material shortages transformed scarcity into innovation and became a status symbol. The Roman estate entered the Gucci family's holdings during this golden period. As the business expanded and profits soared, the family sought to establish themselves not just as merchants, but as members of Italy's elite. The mansion they acquired in Rome represented this ambition perfectly. Located in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods, the property combined classical Roman architecture with Renaissance elegance. Its facade featured the kind of understated grandeur that only centuries of cultural refinement can produce. No ostentatious displays, but rather a quiet confidence that spoke of old money and established taste. The interior of the mansion was a masterpiece of Italian design. Frescoed ceilings depicted mythological scenes, marble floors reflected the play of light from crystal chandeliers, and every room was appointed with carefully selected antiques and contemporary art, the bamboo. Gardens, designed in the classical Italian style, featured geometric patterns of hedges, fountains that had been flowing for centuries, and hidden grottos where family members could escape the pressures of their increasingly public lives. This mansion became more than just a residence. It was the symbolic heart of the Gucci empire. Here, business decisions were made over long dinners in the formal dining room. Here, international clients were entertained in drawing rooms filled with priceless art. Here, the family gathered to celebrate successes, and eventually to confront the conflicts that would tear them apart. Guccio Gucci had 6 children, but it was his sons who would inherit the business, and with it, the burden of his legacy. Aldo, Vasco, Ugo, and Rodolfo. Each brought different talents and temperaments to the family enterprise. Initially, this diversity seemed like a strength. Aldo had a flair for expansion and publicity. Rodolfo brought creativity and an eye for design. The others contributed in their own ways. Together, they built on their father's foundation, transforming Gucci from a successful Italian company into an international luxury brand. But within this apparent unity, tensions simmered from the beginning. The Italian family business model, while creating strong bonds, also generated intense pressure. There was no clear hierarchy beyond paternal authority, no corporate structure to mediate disputes, no separation between family relationships and business decisions. Every disagreement about strategy became personal. Every business setback felt like a family failure. Every success one brother achieved could be perceived as diminishing the others. Aldo emerged as the driving force behind Gucci's international expansion. He was the showman, the networker, the one who understood that luxury was as much about perception as product. He cultivated relationships with celebrities, opened stores in the world's fashion capitals, and positioned Gucci as the brand for those who had arrived. His son, Paolo, inherited his father's flamboyant personality and design ambitions, though their relationship would become one of the most destructive in the family's history. Rodolfo, in contrast, was more reserved and artistic. Before joining the family business, he had been an actor in Italian cinema, performing under the stage name Maurizio Gucci. This creative background influenced his approach to the brand, bringing a cinematic sense of style and drama to Gucci's aesthetic. He eventually settled into managing the Milan operations, and it was Rodolfo who would father the child destined to become the most tragic figure in the Gucci saga, Maurizio Gucci. The brothers maintained a facade of unity while Guccio lived, but after the founder's death in 1953, the cracks began to show. Disagreements over expansion strategies, design directions, and profit distribution created fault lines that would eventually rupture. The Roman mansion, which should have been a neutral family gathering place, became instead a stage for increasingly bitter confrontations. Family dinners that once celebrated achievements became tense affairs where veiled criticisms and passive-aggressive comments replaced genuine conversation. Business meetings held in the mansion's library descended into shouting matches. The servants, loyal to the family for decades, witnessed the deterioration with growing concern, powerless to intervene in conflicts that threatened not just family harmony, but the empire itself. Maurizio Gucci was born in 1948 into extraordinary privilege. He was the only child of Rodolfo Gucci and his wife Sandra, and from birth he was groomed as a potential heir to the Gucci throne. The Roman mansion was his playground during childhood visits, its gardens the setting for elaborate games, its art-filled rooms a constant education in beauty and taste. Unlike his cousins, who grew up surrounded by siblings and the rough and tumble of large family dynamics, Maurizio experienced a more isolated, protected upbringing. This isolation had profound effects. On one hand, Maurizio developed a refined sensibility and a deep appreciation for the Gucci heritage. He understood, perhaps better than others in his generation, what the brand represented and the responsibility that came with the family name. On the other hand, he lacked the thick skin and political instincts necessary to navigate the treacherous waters of family business. He was, in many ways, too gentle for the world he was born into. Rodolfo had high expectations for his son, but also worried about his readiness for leadership. He wanted Maurizio to embody the sophistication and culture of the Gucci name, but he also knew that running the business required a ruthlessness his son might not possess. This tension between father and son would define much of Maurizio's early adulthood. The relationship became particularly strained when Maurizio fell in love with Patrizia Reggiani. Patrizia came from a middle-class background. Her mother had married a wealthy businessman who provided financial comfort, but not the aristocratic pedigree that Rodolfo felt appropriate for a Gucci heir. Beautiful, ambitious, and socially adept, Patrizia was everything Maurizio was not: outgoing, calculating, and hungry for the status that came with the Gucci name. Rodolfo opposed the relationship from the start. He saw in Patrizia a social climber who loved the Gucci name more than she loved his son. He threatened to disinherit Maurizio if he went through with the marriage. The Roman mansion became the setting for epic confrontations between father and son, with Rodolfo pacing the marble floors, alternating between fury and pleading, while Maurizio stood firm in his determination to marry the woman he loved. In 1972, Maurizio and Patrizia married despite Rodolfo's objections. For 2 years, father and son were estranged, a painful separation that weighed heavily. on both men. Rodolfo wandered the halls of the Roman mansion, a lonely figure despite his wealth and success, while Maurizio struggled to establish independence while feeling the loss of his father's approval. Eventually, Rodolfo relented. Perhaps he realized that his stubbornness was only pushing his son further away. Perhaps he hoped that by welcoming Patrizia into the family, he could influence the marriage's dynamics. Whatever his reasoning, reconciliation came, and Patrizia Reggiani officially entered the world of Gucci royalty. She would come to love the Roman mansion, its elegance, its history, the way it impressed visitors, and confirmed her status as a true member of the Gucci family. For a time, it seemed that Rodolfo's fears might have been unfounded. Maurizio and Patrizia had two daughters, Alessandra and Allegra, and appeared to live a fairy tale life. They divided their time between Milan and the Roman estate, entertaining celebrities and business associates, traveling the world as ambassadors of Italian luxury. Patrizia embraced her role as a Gucci wife with enthusiasm, becoming known for her impeccable style and social ambitions. But beneath the glamorous surface, problems festered. The Gucci business itself was in turmoil. The various family factions were locked in legal battles over control and profits. The brand had become diluted through excessive licensing, with Gucci products available at too many price points and in too many markets, eroding the exclusivity that had made it prestigious. Counterfeit Gucci goods flooded markets worldwide, further damaging the brand's image. Maurizio found himself caught between competing family interests. His uncle Aldo and cousin Paolo were engaged in their own bitter feud, with Paolo attempting to launch an independent line using the Gucci name, leading Aldo to have his own son arrested for trademark infringement. The family's dirty laundry was being aired in courts and newspapers around the world. The Roman mansion, once a private sanctuary, was now besieged by journalists seeking comments on the latest family scandal. When Rodolfo died in 1983, he left his 50% stake in Gucci to Maurizio, making him, at age 35, one of the most powerful figures in the company. But power, Maurizio would soon discover, was not the same as control. He inherited not just wealth and influence, but also the full weight of family expectations, business challenges, and the increasingly unstable dynamics within the Gucci empire. With his father's death, Maurizio underwent a transformation. The gentle, artistic man who had seemed content to remain in the background began to display an ambition that surprised everyone who knew him. Perhaps it was the weight of his inheritance, the feeling that he owed it to his father's memory to take control. Perhaps it was Patrizia's influence. She had never hidden her desire for power and status, and now saw an opportunity for her husband to claim what son she believed was rightfully his. Or perhaps Maurizio had always possessed this drive, kept dormant by his father's dominating presence. Whatever the cause, Maurizio set his sights on gaining complete control of Gucci. He began forming alliances, making deals, and maneuvering against his uncle, Aldo, and cousins. The Roman mansion became his headquarters for these operations, its private study the setting for secretive meetings with lawyers and financial advisors. The same walls that had echoed with family laughter now heard whispered strategies and ruthless calculations. Maurizio's first major move was brilliant in its audacity. In 1984, he sold his shares to Investcorp, a Bahrain-based investment company, then used his influence to engineer deals that would allow him to buy back control while sidelining other family members. It was a complex financial maneuver that required nerve, timing, and a willingness to betray family bonds. The quiet, sensitive man his father had worried about proved capable of corporate warfare that would have impressed any business school case study. By 1989, Maurizio had achieved what once seemed impossible. He had become the majority shareholder and chairman of Gucci, with effective control over the company his grandfather had founded. The other family members, including Aldo, were forced out. It was a stunning coup, and for Maurizio, it must have felt like vindication. He had proven himself capable of the ruthlessness and strategic thinking that his father doubted he possessed. The victory, however, was Pyrrhic. In consolidating power, Maurizio had alienated virtually every member of his extended family. Aldo, the man who had built Gucci into an international brand, spent his final years bitter and estranged. Paolo, who had once been close to Maurizio, felt betrayed. Other cousins and relatives watched with horror as the family business became a battlefield, and then fell entirely under the control of one man who seemed to have forgotten what family meant. Maurizio moved into the chairman's office with grand plans. He would restore Gucci to its former glory, recreate the exclusivity and prestige that had defined the brand in its golden age. He hired expensive designers, closed underperforming stores, ended licensing agreements that had diluted the brand. These were necessary steps, and in the long run, many of his decisions would prove prescient. But in the short term, they were catastrophically expensive. Money flowed out of the company at an alarming rate. Maurizio's vision required capital for renovation, rebranding, and restructuring, but revenue wasn't keeping pace with spending. The Roman mansion, which should have been a refuge, became instead a reminder of the pressure mounting on Maurizio's shoulders. He would walk its gardens at night, unable to sleep, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him like the marble ceilings of the palazzo itself. It was during this period that Maurizio's relationship with Patrizia began to deteriorate. The woman who had encouraged his ambition now found herself increasingly sidelined. Maurizio spent more time at the office or traveling for business, less time with his family. When he was at the Roman mansion, he was distracted, preoccupied with problems that seemed to grow larger rather than smaller, despite his efforts. Patrizia, for her part, had fully embraced her role as a Gucci queen. She had become one of Milan's most prominent socialites, known for her lavish parties, expensive tastes, and imperious manner. She had married Maurizio when he was a quiet, relatively powerless heir, but she had helped push him to claim control of the empire. Now that he had it, she expected to reign beside him. Instead, she found herself treated more as an obligation than a partner. The marriage that had once seemed like a love story was becoming a prison for both of them. Maurizio felt suffocated by Patrizia's demands and increasingly irritated by her extravagant spending and social climbing. Patrizia felt abandoned and unappreciated, her ambitions for status and power frustrated by a husband who seemed to be pulling away from her. The Roman mansion, which they had both loved, became a place neither wanted to be. Maurizio because it reminded him of family expectations and responsibilities, Patrizia because it represented a life with a husband who no longer seemed to love her. In 1985, everything changed. Maurizio told Patrizia he was going on a short business trip. He left the Roman mansion early one morning, kissed his daughters goodbye, and walked out the door. He never came back. The abandonment was absolute and cruel in its execution. Maurizio didn't go on a business trip, he went to another woman. He had been having an affair with Paola Franchi, an interior designer and old friend who represented everything Patrizia was not: understated, intellectual, uninterested in social status. For Maurizio, Paola must have seemed like an escape from the pressures that had consumed his life, a chance to be the person he might have been if not for the weight of the Gucci legacy. Patrizia was devastated. The woman who had helped orchestrate Maurizio's rise to power, who had embraced the Gucci name with such enthusiasm, who had borne his children and managed his social life, had been discarded like an outdated accessory. She learned of the affair not from Maurizio directly, but through whispers and eventually confirmation from sources who thought she should know. The humiliation was as painful as the loss itself. The divorce proceedings that followed were bitter and protracted. Patrizia demanded an enormous settlement. She had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle, she argued, and she had been instrumental in Maurizio's success. Maurizio, struggling with the financial pressures of the company, resisted. The legal battle played out in Italian courts and tabloid newspapers, every detail of their failing marriage, exposed for public consumption. The Roman mansion became a source of contention in the divorce. Patrizia wanted it, she had always loved it, had entertained there, had imagined growing old within its walls. Maurizio wanted to keep it, seeing it as his birthright, a connection to his father and grandfather. The fights over the property were really fights over who they had been together and who they would be apart. In the end, neither would get to keep it in any meaningful sense. The mansion would become just another asset liquidated in the financial collapse that was coming. For Patrizia, the divorce was not just the end of a marriage, it was the destruction of her identity. She had been Patrizia Gucci, wife of the chairman, queen of Italian society. Now she was Patrizia Reggiani again, a divorcee, someone whose status derived entirely from a connection that no longer existed. Friends who had courted her favor disappeared. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. She found herself on the outside looking in at a world she thought she had conquered. The psychological impact was profound. Patrizia had always been driven by ambition and status, but she had also genuinely believed that she and Maurizio were partners in building an empire. The realization that he could simply walk away, that all her efforts and sacrifices meant nothing to him, triggered something dark in her personality. She became obsessed with Maurizio, tracking his movements, talking constantly about him, unable to move forward with her life. Friends and family members who saw her during this period described a woman coming apart. She would alternate between rage and despair, between threats and pleading. She consulted psychics and fortune tellers, seeking some explanation for what had happened or some prediction of reversal. She underwent surgery for a brain tumor in 1992, and some would later claim that this medical issue affected her judgment and behavior, though others argued that her growing instability predated the diagnosis. Maurizio, meanwhile, was facing his own crisis. The Gucci company was hemorrhaging money. His grand vision for the brand was sound, but the execution had been too expensive and too slow to show results. Creditors were circling, the board was losing confidence. In 1993, Maurizio was forced to sell his remaining stake in Gucci to Investcorp, ending the Gucci family's control over the company that bore their name. It was a stunning reversal of fortune. In less than a decade, Maurizio had gone from triumphant consolidation of power to complete loss of control. The Roman mansion, along with other properties, had to be sold to pay debts. The palazzo that had symbolized the family's ascent to the heights of Italian society now represented their fall. The frescoed ceilings looked down on empty rooms as art and furniture were auctioned off. The gardens that had hosted glamorous parties grew overgrown as the staff was dismissed. The mansion that had witnessed so much history was reduced to a commodity, valued only for what it could bring at sale. By 1995, Maurizio was trying to rebuild his life. He had lost the company, but he was free of the crushing responsibility that had nearly destroyed him. He was living with Paola Franchi, making plans for new business ventures, trying to move forward. He maintained relationships with his daughters, though they struggled to understand how their father could have left their mother so completely. On the morning of March 27, 1995, Maurizio arrived at his office building in Milan. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind that makes you grateful to be alive. He was carrying a financial newspaper, probably reading about the business world he was preparing to re-enter. He walked through the elegant doorway of the building on Via Palestro, heading toward the elevator. He never reached it. A gunman approached from behind and fired. The first shot hit Maurizio in the back. As he fell, trying to turn, trying to understand what was happening, more shots followed. 4 bullets total, killing him almost instantly. The gunman fled, leaving Maurizio bleeding on the marble floor of the building's entrance. The doorman, Giuseppe Onorato, who had watched Maurizio enter just moments before, was also shot and wounded as he tried to help. The murder sent shockwaves through Italy and the international fashion world. Maurizio Gucci, heir to one of the world's most famous luxury brands, had been assassinated in broad daylight in one of Milan's upscale neighborhoods. The execution-style killing suggested organized crime or a professional hit. Speculation ran wild about who might have wanted Maurizio dead and why. The investigation initially floundered. There were no obvious suspects, no clear motive. Maurizio had business rivals, certainly, but none with apparent reason to order his murder. The Gucci company was no longer in family hands, so there was no fight over inheritance or control that might have motivated violence. For months, the case went cold, becoming just another unsolved murder in a country that had seen too many. Then, in January 1997, nearly 2 years after Maurizio's death, the police arrested Patrizia Reggiani. The investigation that led to her arrest revealed a plot that seemed too lurid for reality. It was like something from a crime novel or a soap opera, not the actions of a real person. But the evidence was damning. Patrizia, consumed by bitterness over her divorce and the loss of her status, had decided that if she couldn't have Maurizio and the life she believed was rightfully hers, no one would. She had recruited a cast of characters that seemed almost comic in their incompetence, if not for the tragedy they caused. Giuseppina Auriemma, her friend and spiritual advisor, became the intermediary. Through Giuseppina's connections, they hired Ivano Savioni, a hotel porter who acted as a go-between. He in turn recruited Benedetto Cerallo, the actual triggerman, and Orazio Cicala, the getaway driver. For this conspiracy, for organizing the murder of a man who had once loved her and given her 2 daughters, Patrizia paid approximately 600 million lira, about $365,000. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Patrizia arrived each day dressed impeccably, as if attending a fashion show rather than a murder trial. She wore her signature Gucci accessories, a pointed reminder of the identity she had lost. The Italian press dubbed her the Black Widow and covered every detail of the proceedings with breathless fascination. The prosecution laid out a narrative of obsession and revenge. They presented evidence of Patrizia's declining mental state after the divorce, her consultation with psychics, her constant tracking of Maurizio's movements. They showed how she had recruited her co-conspirators, how she had paid them, how she had celebrated when learning that Maurizio was dead. The most damning evidence came from Giuseppina Auriemma, who turned state's witness and testified about Patrizia's role in planning the murder. Patrizia's defense attempted to paint her as mentally unstable due to her brain tumor, incapable of rational decision-making. They argued that she had been manipulated by Giuseppina and others who saw an opportunity to exploit a vulnerable woman's grief and anger. But the evidence of premeditation was too strong. The jury found her guilty. In November 1998, Patrizia Reggiani was sentenced to 29 years in prison for arranging the murder of Maurizio Gucci. Her co-conspirators received varying sentences. The woman who had fought so hard to be a Gucci, who had embraced that identity with such enthusiasm, would spend the best years of her remaining life in a prison cell, her name forever associated not with fashion and luxury, but with one of the most notorious crimes in Italian history. The murder of Maurizio Gucci and the subsequent trial of Patrizia Reggiani effectively ended the Gucci family's direct involvement in the brand that bore their name. The company, having been sold to Investcorp and later going public, was eventually acquired by French conglomerate Kering. Under new management, Gucci would be revitalized, becoming more profitable and influential than ever before, but as a corporate entity disconnected from the family that created it. Maurizio's daughters, Alessandra and Allegra, inherited his estate. They maintained a relationship with their mother despite her crime, visiting her in prison, though the emotional scars of having a father murdered by order of their mother are unimaginable. They have lived private lives, largely avoiding the spotlight, carrying the burden of their family's tragic history. The Roman mansion, sold years before Maurizio's death, passed through various hands. It stands today as a private residence, its current owners likely aware of its history, but living their own lives within its walls. The frescoes still adorn the ceilings. The marble floors still gleam, the gardens still bloom. But the ghosts of the Gucci family linger in every room, silent witnesses to ambition, betrayal, and tragedy. Patrizia served 18 years of her sentence before being released in 2016. She emerged from prison unrepentant, telling interviewers that she had never worked a day in her life and wasn't about to start. She received an annuity from Maurizio's estate, providing her with a comfortable income. She returned to Milan, still dressing in Gucci, still carrying herself with the imperious manner that had once made her a fixture of high society. When asked about her crime, she showed little remorse, focusing instead on her grievances against Maurizio for having left her. The story of the Gucci mansion and the family it housed has become a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of wealth and the dangers of confusing personal identity with material success. The Gucci brand itself has thrived in the decades since the family's departure, proof that the creativity and craftsmanship that Guccio Gucci valued transcend in niche monsi any individual or family, but it has thrived without the Guccis, a name that once seemed inseparable from the brand now relegated to historical footnotes. What makes the Gucci family tragedy so compelling is not just its dramatic elements, the wealth, the betrayal, the murder, but what it reveals about human nature. Here was a family that had achieved what millions dream of. They had built an empire, accumulated wealth, established a name that commanded respect worldwide. They had beautiful homes, like the Roman mansion, filled with art and history. They had influence, connections, opportunities that most people can only imagine. Yet none of it was enough. The success that should have united them instead drove them apart. The wealth that should have provided security instead created paranoia and greed. The name that should have been a source of pride became a curse, something to fight over, rather than honor. In their pursuit of control and status, they lost sight of what truly mattered: family, love, integrity. Guccio Gucci built his business on craftsmanship and quality, values that required patience, skill, and dedication. But his descendants became obsessed with power and appearance, valuing the Gucci name for what it could give them rather than what it represented. They turned a family business into a battleground, relationships into transactions, and ultimately a divorce into a murder. The Roman mansion stands as a monument to this tragedy. Its beauty is undeniable, its historical significance clear, but it's impossible to visit it or even think about it without remembering what transpired there and because of the family that once owned it. The walls that once echoed with Maurizio's childhood laughter also heard the arguments that tore his marriage apart. The gardens where family celebrations once occurred became the backdrop for plotting and scheming. The house, meant to symbolize the family's triumph, instead witnessed its destruction. There's a particular poignancy in thinking about Maurizio Gucci in his final years. He had given up so much in his pursuit of control over the company, his relationships with extended family, his marriage, his financial security, and then he lost the company anyway, forced to sell because his grand vision had been too expensive to sustain. In the end, he was left with almost nothing except the chance to start over, to perhaps find some peace in his relationship with Paula, to rebuild connections with his daughters. That chance was stolen from him on a spring morning in Milan by a conspiracy organized by the woman he had once loved, the mother of his children, the person who should have wanted him to find happiness even if it wasn't with her. The tragedy is compounded by the senselessness of it all. Maurizio's death didn't restore Patrizia's status or bring back her marriage. It didn't benefit anyone. It was pure destruction, born of rage and ego, and an inability to imagine a future that didn't include the identity she had built around being Mrs. Gucci. The Gucci story resonates because it's fundamentally about the price of success and the dangers of losing oneself in material concerns. In the decades since Maurizio's death, the luxury fashion industry has grown exponentially, with brands achieving valuations that would have seemed impossible in Guccio's era. The pressure on family businesses to maintain control while competing with massive corporate entities has only intensified. Many other fashion dynasties have experienced similar internal conflicts, though few have ended in murder. The luxury industry seems particularly prone to these dynamics because it deals in intangibles, prestige, status, image that are inherently subjective and emotionally charged. Unlike a manufacturing company or a tech startup where success can be measured in concrete metrics, luxury brands succeed or fail based on perception, mystique, and the stories they tell. This makes every business decision personal, every strategic choice a reflection of one's taste and judgment. For families like the Guccis, there was no separation between personal and professional life. The mansion in Rome wasn't just a home. It was a showroom for the lifestyle the brand promised. Family members weren't just relatives. They were representatives of the brand, their behavior and choices reflecting on the company's image. This constant blurring of boundaries created impossible pressures and made it difficult to resolve conflicts in healthy ways. The Italian family business model, which had served the Guccis well in the company's early decades, proved inadequate for managing a global luxury empire. The expectation that family loyalty would trump business interests, that disputes could be resolved around the dinner table, that blood ties would prevent betrayal, all of these assumptions proved false when the stakes became high enough. The same passionate intensity that Italians bring to family relationships became toxic when combined with corporate intrigue and vast sums of money. The Gucci family tragedy has captured public imagination in ways that few business stories do. It has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and finally, in 2021, a major Hollywood film directed by Ridley Scott and starring Lady Gaga as Patrizia and Adam Driver as Maurizio. The enduring fascination with the story speaks to something deep in our cultural consciousness about wealth, family, and the dark side of the luxury dream. There's a voyeuristic pleasure in watching the wealthy and powerful destroy themselves, a sense that their downfall proves that money can't buy happiness or guarantee security. But the Gucci story transcends simple schadenfreude. It's genuinely tragic in the classical sense, characters with potential for greatness undone by their own flaws, decisions made with seemingly rational motivations leading to catastrophic consequences, the inexorable march toward a conclusion that feels both shocking and inevitable. The Roman mansion serves as the perfect symbol for this tragedy. Mansions are meant to be testaments to success, permanent markers of achievement. But the Gucci mansion instead became evidence of impermanence, a reminder that wealth and status are illusions that can disappear as quickly as they appeared. The family that owned it lost everything that mattered: unity, love, life itself, while the building endured, indifferent to human drama. For visitors to Rome today who might pass by the mansion, it's just another beautiful palazzo among many in a city filled with architectural wonders. They don't see the ghosts walking its halls, don't hear the echoes of arguments and celebrations, don't feel the weight of expectations and disappointments that filled its rooms. But for those who know the story, the mansion is haunted not by supernatural spirits but by the memory of human tragedy, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come not from outside but from within. What can be learned from the Gucci family tragedy? The obvious lessons about greed, vanity, and the corrupting influence of wealth feel almost trite, even if they're true. But there are deeper, more nuanced insights to be gleaned from this story that remain relevant for anyone dealing with family businesses, inherited wealth, or the challenge of maintaining relationships amid success. First, the importance of separating business from family cannot be overstated. The Gucci family's tragedy stemmed in large part from their inability to create boundaries between personal relationships and corporate decisions. When every business disagreement becomes a family fight, when professional criticism feels like personal betrayal, when market strategies are interpreted as statements about love and loyalty, catastrophe becomes almost inevitable. Modern family. Businesses have learned this lesson, implementing governance structures, independent boards, and clear succession plans that reduce the emotional intensity of business decisions. Second, the danger of tying one's identity too closely to external markers of success. Patrizia Reggiani's descent into murderous obsession was fueled by her inability to separate who she was from her role as Mrs. Gucci. When she lost that role, she lost herself. This is not unique to the ultra-wealthy. Anyone who defines themselves primarily through their job, their relationship status, their social position, or their possessions sets themselves up for a devastating crisis when those external factors change. Identity must come from within, from values and character that persist regardless of circumstances. Third, the recognition that success in one area does not guarantee wisdom in others. Maurizio proved capable of brilliant strategic thinking in his corporate maneuvering, but showed devastating poor judgment in his personal life. His abandonment of Patrizia was not just morally questionable, it was tactically stupid, creating an enemy with motive, means, and nothing to lose. Intelligence, education, and business acumen don't automatically translate into emotional intelligence or ethical behavior. Fourth, the understanding that wealth does not insulate you from consequences. The Gucci family believed their status would protect them, that their problems could be solved with lawyers and money, that the rules applying to ordinary people didn't apply to them. But murder is murder, regardless of who commits it or who the victim is. Patricia's wealth bought her good lawyers, but it couldn't prevent her conviction. The Gucci name, once so powerful, couldn't save Maurizio from bleeding out on a marble floor. The Roman mansion embodies all these lessons. It was a symbol of success that couldn't protect the family from internal collapse. It was a beautiful container that couldn't preserve the relationships within it. It was a monument to achievement that witnessed ultimate failure. Buildings endure, but people and relationships are fragile. No amount of marble and frescoed ceilings can substitute for love, respect, and ethical behavior. Within the fashion industry, the Gucci family tragedy is remembered as both a cautionary tale and a fascinating piece of history. The brand itself has worked hard to separate its current identity from this dark chapter. Under the creative direction of designers like Tom Ford in the 1990s and Alessandro Michele more recently, Gucci has been revitalized multiple times, each iteration more successful than the last. The company's market value has reached heights the founding family could never have imagined. But this success comes with an asterisk. The Gucci brand today is a product of corporate management, marketing expertise, and design talent that has nothing to do with the Gucci family. It's a name without the people behind it, a logo, divorced from its origins. Some argue this is appropriate, that the brand has been liberated from family dysfunction to achieve its full potential. Others feel something essential has been lost, that luxury brands derive their mystique from the families and individuals who create them, and that corporate ownership, however profitable, lacks soul. The irony is that the family's tragedy has, in some perverse way, added to the brand's mystique. The story of passion, betrayal, and murder gives Gucci a narrative richness that few other luxury brands can claim. When someone carries a Gucci bag today, they're not just carrying a well-made accessory from a prestigious brand. They're carrying a piece of a legend, a connection to a story that has captivated millions. The brand has benefited from the family's dysfunction in ways that feel uncomfortable to acknowledge. Other fashion dynasties have watched the Gucci saga unfold and drawn their own conclusions. Some have chosen to sell too, corporate entities preemptively avoiding the family conflicts that destroyed the Guccis. Others have implemented strict governance structures to prevent similar dynamics. Still others have simply accepted that family businesses eventually end, that the second or third generation rarely maintains what the founders built, and that this is natural rather than tragic. Beyond the business lessons and cultural impact, it's important to remember the human cost of this tragedy. Real people died, suffered, and had their lives destroyed. Maurizio Gucci was only 46 years old when he was murdered, cut down just as he was trying to rebuild his life. Whatever his flaws, and he had many, he didn't deserve to die on a cold marble floor, shot in the back by a hired killer. His daughters lost their father in the most traumatic way possible, forever marked by the knowledge that their mother orchestrated his murder. Patrizia Reggiani spent 18 years in prison, years she can never reclaim. Whether you view her as a victim of mental illness and circumstance or as a cold-blooded murderer, the waste is undeniable. She could have rebuilt her life after the divorce, could have found new purpose and identity, could have been a grandmother to her children's children. Instead, she threw everything away in pursuit of revenge that brought her nothing but infamy and imprisonment. The extended Gucci family, cousins, nieces, nephews, watched their family name become synonymous with dysfunction and crime. Aldo Gucci, who had built the company into an international powerhouse, died estranged from the family and bitter about what had become of his life's work. Paolo Gucci, whose design ambitions led to conflict with his father and cousins, died in debt and relative obscurity. The family that should have been united in pride over their achievements instead scattered, many choosing to abandon the Gucci name entirely to escape its taint. Even the servants and employees who worked at the Roman mansion and other Gucci properties deserve consideration. They witnessed the family's disintegration firsthand, powerless to intervene. Some had served the family for decades, developing genuine affection for their employers, only to watch those employers destroy each other. When the properties were sold and the businesses dissolved, they lost not just jobs, but connections to a family they had considered part of their own lives. The doorman Giuseppe Onorato, who was wounded trying to help Maurizio after the shooting, carried physical and psychological scars from that morning. He had simply been doing his job, working at a respectable building in a good neighborhood, when violence shattered his ordinary day. His story is a reminder that the Gucci family's dysfunction had consequences that rippled far beyond family members. The Roman mansion still stands, of course. Architecture outlasts the people who build and inhabit it. The current owners, whoever they are, live among the ghosts of the Gucci family, though they may not feel their presence. Perhaps they've redecorated entirely, covering the frescoes with modern art, replacing antique furniture with contemporary pieces, transforming the gardens into something new. Or perhaps they've preserved the mansion's classical beauty, appreciating its history while adding their own chapter to its story. Real estate agents showing the property to potential buyers likely mention its Gucci connection. It adds cachet and interest after all. But they probably don't dwell on the details of the family's tragedy, preferring to focus on square footage, architectural features, and the prestige of the neighborhood. The mansion is once again just a very expensive piece of property, its value determined by the market rather than the memories it contains. For historians and those fascinated by the Gucci story, the mansion remains a pilgrimage site of sorts, though they can only view it from the street. They stand on the sidewalk, imagining the parties that once filled its rooms, the arguments that echoed through its halls, the decisions made within its walls that would ultimately lead to murder. They take photos, share them on social media with hashtags about luxury and tragedy, and move on to the next stop on their Roman itinerary. But the mansion itself is indifferent to this attention. It doesn't care about the Gucci family or their fate. It simply exists, as it has for centuries, sheltering whoever owns it from the elements, its stones and marble and frescoes aging imperceptibly, outlasting the human dramas that unfold within its walls. In another 100 years, the Gucci family will be a footnote in its history, just another group of temporary residents in a building that has seen countless families come and go. This indifference is perhaps the mansion's final lesson. We invest buildings with meaning, treating them as symbols of our success and monuments to our achievements. But buildings don't care about us. They're just structures of stone and wood and glass, shaped by human hands but ultimately separate from human concerns. The Gucci family thought the Roman mansion represented their permanence, their arrival among Italy's elite. Instead, it simply witnessed their impermanence, their arrival and departure barely registering in the mansion's centuries-long existence. The tragic story of the Gucci heir's mansion is ultimately a meditation on value. What are we willing to pay for success? What are we willing to sacrifice for status? At what point does the pursuit of wealth and power become self-destructive? The Gucci family had everything that society tells us to value: money, fame, beauty, influence. Yet they were profoundly unhappy and ultimately destroyed themselves in pursuit of more. Guccio Gucci started with a simple dream: to create beautiful, well-made leather goods that would bring pleasure to those who owned them. This was an honest, achievable ambition rooted in craftsmanship and pride in one's work. But somewhere along the way, his descendants lost sight of this foundational purpose. The business became about power rather than products, about winning rather than creating, about destroying rivals, even family rivals, rather than building something worth preserving. The Roman mansion, which should have been a place of joy and family unity, became instead a stage for betrayal and a monument to waste. All that beauty, all that history, all that carefully curated elegance couldn't prevent the ugliness of human conflict. The frescoed ceilings looked down on scheming and hatred. The manicured gardens provided backdrop for plots of revenge. The marble floors, meant to impress visitors with the family's taste and status, ended up symbolizing the cold emptiness at the heart of their lives. Maurizio Gucci died possessing very little, his company sold, his marriage destroyed, his fortune depleted. Yet in his final years, by all accounts, he was finding some measure of peace. He had escaped the crushing pressure of leading the Gucci empire. He had found love with Paola Franchi, a relationship apparently based on genuine affection rather than status. He was rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. Perhaps he was discovering that the things that truly matter, love, peace, meaningful work, genuine relationships, had been within his reach all along, obscured by the glittering distractions of wealth and power. Patrizia Reggiani, conversely, lost everything in her determination to hold on to symbols of status. She couldn't let go of being Mrs. Gucci, couldn't accept that her identity might exist independent of that role, couldn't imagine a future that didn't include the mansion and the lifestyle and the social position she had fought so hard to attain. In trying to keep what she'd lost, she destroyed what little she had left, including her freedom and any claim to dignity or sympathy. The true tragedy of the Gucci mansion and the family it housed is not that they fell from great heights. Falls are inevitable. Nothing lasts forever. The tragedy is that they fell so completely unnecessarily that all the suffering could have been avoided with better choices, clearer priorities, and the wisdom to understand what truly matters in life. They had every advantage, every opportunity, every resource they could possibly need to create happy, meaningful lives. Instead, they chose conflict over peace, revenge over forgiveness, pride over love, and ultimately violence over acceptance. The Roman mansion stands as a monument to these choices. Future generations will visit it, learn its history, and draw their own lessons. Some will see it as proof that wealth can't buy happiness. Others will view it as a thrilling story of passion and crime. Still others will simply admire its architecture and move on, the human drama barely registering against the beauty of the building itself. But for those willing to look closely, to really think about what happened within those walls, the mansion offers a profound warning. It reminds us that no amount of success can compensate for personal failure, that external achievements mean nothing if we lose ourselves in pursuing them, that the houses we build and the fortunes we accumulate are ultimately just stage settings for the only drama that truly matters. How we treat each other, how we love and fail to love, how we choose to live the brief time we have in this world. The Gucci family could have been remembered for the beautiful things they created, for their contribution to fashion and craftsmanship, for building something that brought pleasure to millions. Instead, they're remembered for tearing each other apart, for choosing destruction over creation, for proving that it's possible to have everything and still lose what matters most. The Roman mansion, meant to symbolize their triumph, instead marks their tragedy, a beautiful, empty monument to the terrible price of forgetting what truly has value in this fleeting life we're given.